Thank you for coming to our panel discussion today. We've hopefully got a very engaging and interesting session for you today with some wonderful women on the panel here today. So I'm Carolyn Gowers. I'm the Executive Director of Project Respect. We're a support and referral organisation for women and gender diverse people with experience in the sex industry, and also for women and gender diverse people who've experienced sexual exploitation. And we're actually based in Melbourne, so thank you for the invite to come up to this wonderful forum today. So on my left here, you've met Matilda this morning already, but we have Matilda Constable-Webb. And Matilda is the Director of Business Operations for Survivor Connections. Matilda's a lived experience advocate, leader and systems reformer committed to creating a safer, trauma-informed and violence-informed services across financial, legal, healthcare and government sectors. With Aboriginal heritage and a strong commitment to cultural integrity, she brings both personal insight and strategic leadership to every space that she enters. So could you please welcome Matilda? And secondly, we have Fiona. So Fiona David, who's the CEO and founder of Fair Futures. Fiona is a founding leader of Walk Free and a member of the advisory committee to the New South Wales Anti-Slavery Commissioner. Fiona has championed anti-slavery efforts for 3 decades. She led the creation of the Global Slavery Index and champions the inclusion of people with lived experience of modern slavery in her work. Her recent projects include co-leading a consultation on the economic empowerment of survivors in collaboration with Survivor Connections and Project Respect. So please welcome Fiona. And down at the end of the panel there we have Sally Irwin. Sally is the CEO and founder of the Freedom Hub. So Sally is a businesswoman and modern slavery specialist who creates opportunities for every Australian to do something to end slavery and help people who have survived this crime. Sally's had over 16 years of experience working with survivors of modern slavery in Australia and Europe. And Sally launched the Freedom Hub in 2014 to specifically work to end slavery in Australia, help survivors of this crime flourish again, and partner with business in the fight to end global slavery. Since its inception, the Freedom Hub has grown to include a survivor school, ethics cafe, event venue, catering and ethical business services. So please welcome Sally to the panel as well. All right. So today we're talking about economic empowerment, and specifically we're exploring what the impact this has on people and their experiences of exploitation. So as we listen to the panellists, it will be really helpful if you can please think about the context of this in terms of the prevention, early intervention, response and recovery as it relates to modern slavery, and what this means to people who have experienced or are at risk of experiencing modern slavery. And it's worth remembering that this spectrum of prevention through to recovery isn't linear, and that recovery itself is also part of prevention. So in the discussion, we're going to try and draw out the intersection with trauma and financial literacy as it relates to economic empowerment. And so economic empowerment can mean different things to different people, so I'm not going to start with a definition, but we're going to hear from panellists about some of those meanings as we go through the discussion. So the first place to start is we're going to look at the root causes and where panellists have their perspectives, where they converge, or they might include some unique insights that they found in their experiences or in their work. So Matilda, we're going to start with you. So from your experience, how do you define empowerment, and how does economic disempowerment contribute to people being at risk of modern slavery?
Thank you. For me, empowerment isn't something given, it's something reclaimed. It's the ability to make choices and have control over those choices that are truly your own, without fear, coercion, or dependence on someone else for your safety or survival. Economic disempowerment strips away that freedom of choice when you have no income, no access to safe credit, and no control over your finances or education around this. You're at the mercy of whoever does. We talk about modern slavery as an act of exploitation. However, in my experience, it begins long before that. It starts with systems, including societal, public, legal and familial, that normalise the over-reliance on others, support lack of autonomy and undervalue women's work and treat survival as a privilege instead of a right. Empowerment for me is when systems, financial, legal, welfare, and various others that we'll be talking about start centering dignity and choice. It's the movement or moment when people move from surviving systems to instead reshaping them. During the Economic Empowerment Project, an initiative conceived and led by Survivor Connections in co-design and delivery with Fair Futures, Project Respect and lived experience consultants, we heard again and again that empowerment means not being afraid that tomorrow will undo everything that you built today.
Thanks, Matilda. And it's really good to be able to phrase it in the way you have about what the positives are and where we can move forward from where people may be at the moment. And Sally, you've had more than 16 years' experience working with survivors in Sydney and across Australia and overseas prior to that. So what have you learnt through that work are the root causes of economic disempowerment for survivors of modern slavery?
Well, for today's panel, I've sort of come up with about 7, but I just wanted to quickly explain, because people mightn't understand the backstory, a little bit about the fact that our survivor schools are both in Sydney and in Brisbane at the moment, and we're working towards Melbourne. But most survivors that walk into our school or join us for the first time, they come in carrying 2 main things, and that is fear and silence. Their English can be limited and their confidence is often gone. So we always start with a safe community, building a safe space for them, and a peer support group, which we've heard about this morning, is so vital to recovery. And then we eventually move them into trauma-informed classes, courses where they can learn how to live and work in Australia. After months of that, we'll find that their voices return and their self-belief systems start to build. So then we take the first steps of helping them go back to work, which is a very frightening step for some. But those people, the jobs that we find for them are with screened and partnered and well-trained employment partners, basically. So not all survivors, as you've heard this morning, not all survivors find that kind of support. So from the 16 years, I've come up with 7, what I think would be probably, there's probably hundreds, but I've just picked 7 things, and I believe I can do this in less than my 3 minutes allocated, because I've practiced. I read it out this morning. So the first one is immigration issues is a root cause. Visas are tied to employers, passports are taken, identity gets lost, there's confusion about work rights, no income safety net, and for students who get only 20 hours a week, that pushes them into cash jobs and in situations where they can barely live in our country. The second root cause I think would be trauma and mental health. Obviously post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression. Recovery takes time. Short-term overnight programs or short-term programs just don't help as much as this longer-term opportunities. The third one would be language and digital literacy. Limited English and low digital confidence, particularly now with AI. We've just developed an AI course for ESL and beginners to really try and help them grasp this. But those things actually can lock people out of employment opportunities or the job market in Australia. The fourth is gaps in their work history and no local experience. That sort of even AI is recruiting now, and often humans are not even being met with. So there's a lot going on in that whole space as far as a root cause that stops the economic disempowerment or empowerment. The fifth one would be isolation. Many, and I think we've heard this already this morning too, many have no family network to support them or help them, or friends, because they're actually isolated and a bit fearful about going out and mixing with other people. Unstable housing, little or no childcare at all to be able to go out and do these things. So isolation, as we've probably all learnt over COVID and all the research that's going around, does slow recovery. Sixth one is sector vulnerability. Obviously survivors are often in under-regulated work. It's an easier place to get a job nowadays, and I think that hospitality, agriculture, domestic labour, I know I'm preaching the choir here, you all know this, but this is where exploitation and discrimination are common. And the seventh root cause that I thought I'd finally touch on is the regional and temporary worker risk. People become disconnected from schemes, exploited for years, become ghosts in our system because no one knows they exist, and then they're left with no clear pathway or pathway back to lawful, dignified work.
Thanks, Sally. You can really understand in some of those examples you've given the intersection of those things as well. It's not as though it's one per person, so thank you very much. So Fiona, you've very recently been involved in a project centring consultation with survivors on this very subject. Can you explain a little of this community consultation work and how it impacted your understanding of economic empowerment and what surprised you within the conduct of this work?
Thanks, Carolyn. So first of all, I'll just explain what the Economic Empowerment Project did. Then I'll talk a little bit about some of what what surprised me and what I learnt from it. But in doing so, I just want to acknowledge there's a number of people in this room who were participants and who were involved, whether as employees and my colleagues at Fair Futures or as interview participants. So I'll do my best to, reflect back what was shared with me. So the Economic Empowerment Project was an idea that Sarah Stricker and Survivor Connections came up with, and it was really born of the observation that the issue that Survivor Connections cohort kept talking about and that kept seeming to be so important was this issue of not being economically empowered, not having the funds to stand on their own 2 feet, not having the funds to get decent housing, not being able to find a pathway into safe work. So Carolyn from Project Respect and Sarah came together and conceived this project, and with my colleagues at Fair Futures, we were very fortunate to come in as the implementing partner. So what did we do? We had this grand ambition. We had 3 months start to finish with this project, so it was very, very tight. We had a grand ambition to speak to 15 people with lived experience, conduct a pre-survey, an hour-and-a-half interview, and then structured debrief afterwards. We were very hopeful we'd get 15. So on the Thursday night, Sarah, I think, sent out the email at about 6 o'clock on Thursday night. By 9:30 the next morning, we were full and we had a waiting list. So just let that sink in. Anybody who thinks it's difficult to consult with survivors, talk to survivors about what they want to talk about, and they will talk to you. So that was what we did. We literally got survivors to tell us what their experience of economic disempowerment was and why they thought economic empowerment was such a critical issue. So in terms of what I learnt, there's really 2 big things I just want to focus on at this point. The first is that economic empowerment is not a side issue for the 18 people I talked to. It is the issue. It is not something to fix later. It is the root cause of how they ended up in the situation they're in and why they're at risk of potentially being back in that situation again later. Now, what do I mean by economic empowerment? One of our fabulous participants, I don't know who it was, this was a survey response, they described it as economic empowerment to me means no one has power over you. No one has power over you because of poverty or disadvantage. It means you can thrive instead of fighting just to survive. It means you can do the things you need to be well and not be forced to do things that make you unwell. It means when people do bad things to you, you have a way to do something about it. So economic empowerment was seen as very fundamental to choice and control. The second point that I just pull out at this point, just to give you a sense of what came out of the research, was we often hear words like intersectionality and how we hear about different forms of discrimination intersect. This project was a really great example of what that looks like in the real world. So for example, another quote from a participant: stigma, judgment, not being allowed to talk. Because I'm not sure if you know, but I have an intellectual disability as well. So often people just they try and take your voice away. Women are not allowed to speak. Women are not allowed to raise their voice. They're not allowed to have financial freedom. They are just like cows for men. So that's two different participants. The first one really talking about their lived experience of disability, and the second one really about gender discrimination. And then, of course, the third big topic, racism. If you're never included because of your race, again, this is a quote, if you're never included because of your race, then it's hard to become economically empowered. I think a lot of people do not understand what racism is, how it affects us, how it manifests, and why it's ignored. So those are the sort of two big standouts that I'd note at the moment. Economic empowerment is the issue. And then second of all, we really need to be thinking about intersectionality, not as a complex discursive term, but as in terms of how it actually impacts on people's lives and experiences every day.
Gee, thanks, Fiona. That's really getting to the heart of it, isn't it? We really need to be careful to not be skirting around the edges of these issues. They're massive issues. Matilda, I'm just going to circle back to you. In your experiences, how do you see the impacts of trauma intersect with systemic barriers like poverty, discrimination, or lack of access to education?
Trauma definitely doesn't end when the abuse stops. It continues in so many ways. One is definitely how systems respond. For survivors, trauma and economic barriers are so deeply intertwined, and one theme that emerged from survivors we engaged with in consultation was that approximately 78% identified that financial security is the biggest barrier to recovery and long-term stability. Examples such as coerced debt, housing insecurity, or being blacklisted from employment become another form of entrapment. We see this when trauma is met with bureaucracy instead of with care, and really taking away from that human-centred approach, it reinforces the same power imbalances that caused the harm in the first place. That's why trauma-informed systems must also be economically informed, because safety and stability can't exist without financial freedom. As one participant in our research said, you can't heal when you're hungry or scared of eviction.
Thank you. Thanks, Matilda. So economic empowerment or disempowerment itself being a barrier to recovery, we're also going to talk about the barriers to economic empowerment itself and what needs to change. So panellists, I'm going to ask you, what are the most persistent barriers to economic empowerment that you see in your work or in your experience? And this could include where you see commonly identified issues and challenges that services or sectors in responding to these common issues in a way that positively impacts the lives of survivors or those at risk. So this could also include government's role in responding to these challenges and the role that stigma or failure to establish trust with survivors plays in creating these barriers. So I'm going back to you again, Matilda. And what barriers have you personally faced or witnessed that are often overlooked?
I've got a little bit of a list. So I will be reading from that list because I think it's really crucial that I can get everything that I felt very strongly about when I was writing this out correctly, and how I hope it comes across and intended. But as I mentioned before, coerced debt, survivors left legally responsible for debts created under abuse and with no accessible mechanisms for redress around this. A big one is institutional disbelief. Systems viewing survivors as risky clients instead of people rebuilding stability and needing and trying to seek out that support. That is really hard to do in the first place. This is a really big one, but from my experiences, but that's criminalisation under coercion or lack of education. Many survivors are coerced into committing offences or unknowingly breach laws under threat, manipulation, or survival pressure. Instead of recognising these as outcomes of exploitation, systems often impose fines or convictions that entrench and continue that disadvantage from that systemic level. Holding victims accountable for perpetrators' behaviour is one of the most invisible forms of economic harm, creating lifelong barriers to employment and financial recovery. Poverty penalties. Being poor costs more. From higher interest rates to lack of childcare, it is a serious economic issue. Policy gaps. There's few trauma-informed pathways to secure education or employment. Economic surveillance, where survivors' spending or digital banking activity is still monitored by former partners or family members, creating that ongoing and continued risk for survivors. Systemic punishment for instability. So, for example, credit systems that penalise people for changing addresses frequently, even when those moves potentially were due to safety concerns. Child protection repercussions. Survivors being told that financial stress or, again, continuously moving to try and protect themselves and their children could count against them in parenting assessments, deterring disclosure to begin with, or help seeking from those individuals potentially. And overarching all of these are the clouds, the experiences and conditions such as trauma, discrimination, and harmful policies that continue to shape who gets access to employment and who doesn't. In the Economic Empowerment Project, over 60% of survivors describe being re-traumatised by frontline systems, particularly when forced to retell financial abuse experiences to multiple agencies over and over again to try and get that support that they are, again, seeking. We still measure survivors by how well they comply and exit a program, not how well they can recover and the support that they actually are receiving to be able to recover. The shift we need is systems accountability, measuring success by survivor outcomes and not program exits.
Yeah, gee, thanks, Matilda. I think in listening to what you were saying then as well, it's also, I reflected on the number of systems that a survivor has to manage and the number of different people they need to encounter within those systems and what those people need to know. But when we know that that's what we need to know, we can get working on that. So Sally, building on that, what structural or policy level changes would you say would make the biggest difference in those barriers?
Well, I thought I might just start by just probably almost confirming what you've just said and what we've heard this morning by just reading a very quick story from one of my survivors, because I think she accurately depicts the situation. To the barriers, she says, I met Sally during my lowest moments in Sydney. My life had changed because I was free from slavery, but now I'm in another form of slavery with bureaucracy and not sure how I'll ever get home. Miss Sally helped me have faith in myself, to believe that I'm capable and never allow other people to exploit me again. She helped me gain back my confidence. It was a struggle at first to work. I think this is really important. People discriminated against me in the workplace, but I was able to overcome those challenges. I'm so proud of myself for being able to show the company that I'm worthy. The Freedom Hub has prepared me to go back home, to never be afraid to speak up and to face challenges. And she's at home and she's actually advocating for women's rights for the Red Cross. It's pretty phenomenal. Anyway, I love that. I love that she's pointed out the bureaucracy. She felt like she was still in slavery, and I just think that's really an important thing that we all just need to think about. And we've certainly heard that well this morning, thanks to the brave people that stood up here and spoke. So there's a lot more to it than just broken trust and red tape and all that sort of thing. I've picked 4 things that I think are really big barriers that we need to consider. The first one's obvious because I just spoke about it, and that's our justice system is a maze. People just don't know where to go, who to speak to. There's too many people, too many caseworkers involved. There's too many interviews being held. And survivors themselves are saying exactly that the process can re-traumatise them and make it very difficult to recover. And yeah, it's a hard place to be. The second barrier, I think, is the fact that we're still missing people. I think what was the criminology department's figures of 1 in 5 come forward. Well, you know, what are we doing about the people that are not coming forward? It's a huge barrier for them to come forward. So I just think that one of the barriers is that we're not training, and it's pleasing to hear that there's police work going on and training going on with all the unions and site managers and people like that. So I think we're working on that well, but it is under-detection is very real. The third one is visas. Now, I'm not a visa expert, and I don't know that anybody can be because they change so often. But just picking on 3 of them, I've already talked about the student visa only being 20 hours. We're just asking students to end up in slavery, I think, with that one. I think visa issues being linked to employers as well is another barrier. And if they're in slavery for a time, they often don't have a visa or any identity. And so how can we help them if we insist on having those things? Most community services and government require those things to help. So at the Freedom Hub, we've got a lot. We call that, it's like being a ghost in the system. People, if they've been in slavery for 15 years, no one knows they exist. So that because we're privately funded, we deliberately go looking and helping people like that. And then finally, I guess that grievance mechanisms are weak on the ground. I think that telling people to go to the local authorities is not actually a grievance system. Workers need anonymous off-site channels, no reprisals and responses, and we need to train businesses in how to listen and how to escalate and when not to escalate, and all the complexities that come around grievance.
Yeah, fantastic. Another theme there on what is it that people in the systems need to know to be able to support people.
Yep.
So Fiona, we've got some wonderful evidence there from people with lived experience in the Economic Empowerment Project who very generously shared some of their experiences as part of that. And so what does the evidence from people with lived experience say about effective interventions?
Sure. So first of all, there's 5 recommendations that will be in the Economic Empowerment Report that we'll be releasing soon. And just to be fully transparent, while Fair Futures did the research, it was ultimately our survivor consultants, Sarah and Matilda, who looked at those and really made meaning of them with the Survivor Connection Steering Committee and other people who participated. So what were those recommendations? Just very quickly. 1, design and implement services to restore functional autonomy. So to your point, Matilda, it's not about has somebody exited the program, it's about have you actually restored their functional autonomy. The second one was around embedding lived expertise right throughout everything that everybody in this room does. So whatever it is that you do in this room, if it has something to do with modern slavery, have a think about how you can embed lived expertise within that. The third one has been mentioned several times, shifting the focus from crisis to long-term recovery. Then the 4th and 5th recommendations I think are really important and are not things we talk enough about. That is really supporting survivors to have sustainable economic recovery. I mean, we hear some discussion about compensation and the need for victims' compensation, and that's absolutely part of it. But it's also the reality that people are trying to live on a poverty, below the poverty line payment system in which they can't afford housing. Simple as that. What do we expect them to do? And then the final one is around shifting, absolutely be trauma informed, but even better, let's be trauma transformative in how we do things in our system. How can we use our services and our practices and our programs to really support people to transform their trauma into a source of power and strength? Thanks.
Thanks, Fiona. It's a pretty good segue into the next question as well, which is about truly trauma-informed financial literacy. And what is it and how do we get there? So I'm coming back to you now, Matilda. In your view, what are the risks of delivering financial literacy programs that aren't trauma-informed? And how can we co-design financial literacy initiatives that are safe, empowering and culturally responsive?
The biggest risk is re-traumatisation. Many programs ask survivors to revisit budgeting or debt without addressing the emotional legacy of control. It can reawaken fear and immense shame. The trauma-informed financial literacy, for that to be truly trauma-informed, starts with trust, not numbers, which we've touched on quite a few times already. It's relational before it's financial. As Fiona David highlighted, co-design isn't just ethical, it's also effective. When you build from lived reality, you build programs that actually stick and they work because they're being built and designed for and by people that need them. This is what shifts generational trauma and impacts supporting economic empowerment, not just now, but for the future and for future generations. If we take the time, the resources from lived experience that is available and wanting to help, it can absolutely help to reshape and help form these approaches as well.
Yeah, terrific. I would probably raise an argument that all work is relational, but it's really important to remember that. And sometimes, we all forget because work is also busy. But that everything you've said really rings true to me about the emotional stuff that sits in anything that you're trying to get recovery on, and that includes the money, the numbers, the financial literacy. So it makes total sense. So we're going to move to having a slightly more positive lens on some of this, and that is what is working. So what practical measures people have experienced that have had a really positive impact on their lives. So as a question for all of the panellists, and when I get through this big preamble, we're going to start with Matilda, then go to Fiona, then Sally. And can you share an example of an initiative in the economic empowerment sphere that your organisation or you personally have experienced that's made a real difference to people? And if so, what made it successful? And we know that so much successful work with people with lived experience is relational. Can it be scaled? Can it be adapted? And how have survivors been involved in shaping or leading those efforts? So that's a really big question. So each of the panellists can take their own view of how they would like to answer that about what's working. So Matilda.
I could talk about this forever. But no surprise, I'm actually going to be talking about the Economic Empowerment Project. It was built to model what a pathway to empowerment looks like in practice, translating lived experience into measurable systemic change. It was conceived, like I mentioned, and led by Survivor Connections, co-delivered with Fair Futures and Project Respect. The project directly engaged 18 survivors, co-designed and co-delivered by 2 survivor consultants, 2 survivor employees who were employed by Fair Futures, ensuring lived experience wasn't just consulted, but embedded throughout design, implementation, and evaluation. One of the key outcomes was the Freedom Tree framework, a survivor-designed model where the roots represented the conditions that enable economic empowerment, so safety, stability, belonging. The trunk represents the support that sustain it, education, work, community, and the leaves represent what empowerment looks like in people's lives, so agency, financial security, choice. The clouds show what gets in the way, so trauma, systemic bias, policy barriers. Findings highlighted that empowerment grows from stable roots, access to housing, income, safety, and trusted relationships, not from policy changes alone. It showed that economic empowerment is both prevention and recovery, not a step after crisis, but the foundation that stops it from recurring. What made it work was survivor governance. Survivors led the methodology, data interpretation, and recommendations. Our metrics weren't participation rates, they were outcomes like sustained housing, reduction in debt stress, and improved sense of agency. When survivors co-design the system, empowerment stops being a program and becomes a practice. The project's success is thanks to the collaboration and collaborative leadership of Sarah Schricker, Fiona David, Carolyn Gowers, and the Survivor Connections team, and all of those that helped and participated who shaped every layer of its design from start to finish.
Amazing, thank you. I'm going to pass directly to Fiona because I think Fiona's got some additional thoughts.
Sure. So your question, Carolyn, was around, I guess, what works to help people with economic empowerment. Just reflecting on my own experience as an employer, I think it's very powerful to look for ways that, what is it that you can do as an employer, as an organisation, to support people with lived experience or lived expertise to become part of the response to modern slavery. And in my situation, the things that I've been able to do is have lived expertise colleagues working for me at Fair Futures, and also working very closely with people with lived expertise on the design of research programs. So, that's not going to be the situation for everybody in this room, but everybody in this room is probably going to have some opportunity that they can think, okay, so here's a way I could support people with lived experience with economic empowerment, which then leads to other forms of empowerment.
Yeah, terrific. So I think, as Fiona mentioned, there is a report coming out about this, and within the report we have detailed exactly how that was done and how the survivor leadership was leading this program, but you'll be able to see through that description exactly how that happened. Sally,
Yes.
you've probably got lots of examples.
Yeah, I do. I'm sitting here thinking, gosh, what will I pick? Because I've listed a whole lot here. But yes, I guess for me, I'll just focus on Australia because obviously I work with NGOs all over the world. But I do think in the 11 years that we've been running, people think it's a school, so it's like TAFE, but it's nothing like that. Often it's meeting someone in a park or somewhere they feel safe and actually coaching them and working with them on an area. Every single thing that we do is through a survivor's lens. So we let them pick from the very beginning, what does success look like for them? We're about the future. We try not to get involved in the past and a lot of this stuff. Our sweet spot is when somebody's got a caseworker and they've got all visas and they've got all that stuff worked out, and they refer them on to us to really help look at their future. And their future is very different, every single one of them. I was sharing this recently with you guys, that for someone who may have come from a pig farming situation in Papua New Guinea, an absolute need for her was McDonald's and a want was a pair of shoes. Whereas we as Westerners might go, well, actually you need the shoes and you don't need McDonald's. But we let them tailor what they believe that their future and what they want to achieve in their life, or why they came to this country in the first place, is their success story. So we will then work and tailor a program around that and help them for their lifetime if need be. We've now got a number of mothers groups because 8 years later they've gone off and found a partner and had babies and don't want to go through a systemist way of doing it through a hospital, so we've had to get in midwives and teach them about breastfeeding and just lots of little examples like that. But a real financial one, which, since we're talking a little bit about that right now, is we've adapted one of the big banks' financial courses that teaches budgeting and stuff like that. But we've adapted that with a survivor-informed approach and helped over the last 8 years. Survivors have honed every one of our courses to what they're looking for and what they need. And if there's a new one like AI I just mentioned, would bring it up. But this financial one, for example, this particular male, he's up in Brisbane, he did the basic one that we've worked on. When I say I've worked on, we've just tried to make it as, we try and show rather than teach. We're not qualified teachers, we just try and show. So for an example, if we're trying to plan a meal, we'll have a pair of scissors and a Coles catalogue, and you've got $20, let's plan out some meals, and they can choose what sort of food they want and pick it all together and come up with meals. Long story short, this guy is coming back and doing it again. But one of the things he's learnt to do in this is budgeting. I know I just heard what you said about budgeting, but he learnt to actually save up for things. And I only found out myself yesterday, so that's why it's fresh in my mind, that he is coming back to do it again. But someone offered to pay for him to have driving lessons, and he goes, no, Freedom Hub's taught me how to budget, and we've worked on this together. I'm going to pay for my own driving lessons. And that, to me, is empowerment. He's choosing what he wants to spend his money on, but it's something that he's chosen to do with his money, and no one's telling him what to do with it or how, you know. So I just loved that story, and I thought it fitted really well today. So yeah, we already partner with organisations or other courses that are out there, but we actually try and tailor it to whatever the needs are for the survivors. And I think that's the empowerment side of it, the fact that we will tailor individually to every individual what their dreams and hopes are, and we'll work with them on something that works for them. Yeah.
Flexibility and
Yes.
centering the person
Yes.
sounds key.
Yes.
And all of the panellists wanted an opportunity to give you just the last thought that they would like you to take away from today's discussion. Sally.
Oh, okay. Well, I think we have a model that works and can be scaled. So I guess for me, the thing that we need to recognise there's not enough support out there, but what support there is, you can support us in, and that would make a big difference for us as far as and the people that we are working with. Of course, if there's 41,000 people out there, we've got a lot more work to do, but I think focusing on what we can do in our own backyard and in our own little runway is a priority for supporting. Yep.
Thank you. Fiona?
Start with what people with lived experience say they want and need, and everything else will follow from there.
Thank you. Matilda?
I wrote something out for this because I think it's a very, very, very important piece or question. But and it actually reflects what's been talked about already in the questions that we've been asked. I think my summarised theme, I suppose. But to me, economic empowerment, it's not about charity, it's about justice. Every person in this room, whether there's a role that you take part in policy or banks or anywhere where you could potentially be touching somebody by extension or yourself who has experienced modern slavery in Australia or has had those experiences, you can absolutely support and build freedom. The question shouldn't be how do we help survivors, it should be how do we build systems so survivors never have to rebuild from zero again. That it isn't about fixing people, it's about fixing the conditions that made exploitation possible in the first place, holding accountability to the people that have done that, not on the survivor or person who's experienced that to have to rebuild themselves. And when we measure dignity as the ultimate KPI, for example, it really does become about prevention and it becomes about possibilities. So I suppose in summary, freedom is built through equity and equity starts when survivors lead.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, audience. I hope you're glad you came here today. I am.
Me too.
So thanks very much to our wonderful, wonderful panellists for sharing their expertise, Matilda, Fiona and Sally. Thanks, everyone.